The route to Greece is closing. The words of the Greek Prime Minister as his country suspends requests for asylum. Athens warns it will now arrest those entering the country illegally from North Africa. But is this the right response to a surge in illegal migration? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. Greece suspends asylum applications for migrants arriving by sea for 3 months. It's come about after a rise in the number of people crossing the Mediterranean Sea from Libya to the island of Crete. Athens wants to stop boats carrying migrants from even entering Greek waters. Human rights groups say that denying them asylum is against international law. They've already spoken out against what they call the criminalization of search and rescue operations for migrants attempting the crossing. So, can a change in policies really stop people heading to Europe? Are North African countries able to help in reducing the number of boats? And what are the likely outcomes of this suspension for the migrants themselves? We'll put those questions to our guests, but first, Imogen Kimber reports.
These people had been heading to the Greek island of Crete in a fishing trawler. But after their boat was intercepted by Greek authorities, they're now on their way to a detention centre near Athens.
The Greek government is sending a firm message. The route to Greece is closing, and that message is directed at all human traffickers.
The Prime Minister says there's been a big increase in the number of people crossing the Mediterranean from Libya. Now, the country is suspending asylum applications for migrants arriving from North Africa by sea for the next 3 months. Greek coastguards say nearly 2,000 people arrived in Crete in the past week. 10,000 people have come this year, compared to around 5,000 in 2024. Prime Minister Mitsotakis says instead of asylum, migrants will face detention.
Any migrants entering the country illegally will be arrested and detained. Our second decision concerns the creation of one, at first, and possibly a second, permanent closed facility in Crete.
Although Greece wants to stop people before they arrive. Greek armed forces and the Coast Guard will work with Libyan authorities to stop boats entering Greek waters, and even to stop them leaving the shores of Libya. Ministers from Greece, Italy, Malta and a European Commissioner have met the Libyan head of the National Unity Government. He says they have a plan to slow migrants crossing, but he added,
"We are fully aware that the migration issue cannot be addressed independently of the security situation in Libya."
The Greek Council for Refugees says suspending asylum is a violation of international law. This year, the European Court of Human Rights found Greece guilty of conducting what it called systematic pushbacks of would-be asylum seekers. The Council also says Greece and the EU are already criminalising search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean. And experts say all this puts lives in danger and doesn't stop people trying to cross the sea. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. From Athens, we're joined by Eleni Spathana, a lawyer with refugee support Aegean and the author of Legal Assistance of Asylum Seekers and Refugees in Greece. From Paris, we're joined by Amine Snoussi, a political analyst and journalist. And from Cambridge, Marianna Karakoulaki, a researcher at the University of Birmingham, focusing on forced migration on Europe's East Mediterranean migratory route. A welcome to you all. Eleni, let's start with you. Are Greek authorities currently acting in violation of the European Convention on Human Rights?
Good afternoon from Athens. Thank you for the reaction and for inviting us as well. Of course, it's out of any discussion that Greece violates flagrantly at the moment international, constitutional and national law, as well as EU legislation related to, first of all, the respect of principle of non-refoulement, and of course the right to seek and enjoy asylum within the country. It is not the first time. I would like to remind you that this kind of reaction was actually introduced for the first time in Greece in 2020, in February, March, when we had this emergency legislative decree with the same content as the content of this new, I would not like to call it legislative provision, which is actually, but cannot stand as legislative provision, as it breaches flagrantly the obligations and the provisions of all related human rights core, let's say, legislation, which prevails in Greece as well as in all EU countries, national legislation.
All right, Eleni, we'll get into all of that in more detail in a few minutes. I mean, to what extent are Greece's actions being driven by internal politics? Why are migrants viewed so negatively in the country? What's driving that attitude?
Well, it's driven by the explosion of far-right ideas in Europe. More generally, Europe is feeding the narrative of the far-right, criminalizing migrants and asylum seekers, framing them as potential criminals, a danger to society. And this narrative has been going on for several decades, driven by the far-right. But now we are seeing more and more centrist political parties accepting this idea, feeding this political ideology, and it's more and more scary that Europe is feeding the far right, and it is trying to find bilateral alliances with foreign countries, often authoritarian regimes. We talked about Libya, and we know how much racism and violence on black migrants we have seen in Libya. And Greece, the Greek government knows that and is dealing with Libya, knowing that it will lead to a massive danger on black migrants.
Marianna, over 9,000 migrants have arrived on Crete since the beginning of this year, more than 1,500 of them on Sunday and Monday this week alone. Those are staggering numbers. Is it any wonder that Greece is resorting to radical methods to try to dissuade people from making the journey and all the danger that it entails?
I wouldn't actually call this as a staggering number, because earlier this morning I received Frontex's new data on migration, and for the first half of 2025, migration is lower than it was last year. I think that Greece is playing with the far-right narratives, as Amine has said. I think that presenting the situation as an emergency situation is something that is happening throughout Europe. And this is happening because clearly Europe does not want someone that is not that does not fit the European narrative and the European image. And this has been extremely clear for the past decade. It's been 10 years since the so-called migration crisis, and we've consistently been seeing the exclusion of those who do not belong in Europe. And who are those? They're Black Africans and they're Muslims. So I think Greece and the European Union should not be seen in isolation. What Greece does is what the European Union does. The European migration agenda is securitizing the European border, but it is going to fail because you cannot stop migration. You cannot stop people who flee disaster, who flee war, who flee impossible economic situations. But Europe refuses to see this.
Eleni, do you agree with that? Does this come down to racism? Who are these people arriving on Greek shores? Where are they coming from? How many are genuine asylum seekers? How many of them are economic migrants, people hoping for a better life for themselves and their families?
First of all, I would agree totally that we don't have an emergency situation considering at least numbers. The fact that we have a humanitarian, let's say, so-called micro-crisis in Crete is the result of the denial of the authorities, the central authorities, to take measures, the basic, actually, measures to address reception in a key, let's say, entry point, which is Crete for many years. So starting from this, definitely we don't have an emergency situation. Then I would consider that at the time being, I would agree that the stranger, which is actually the poor, coming from the so-called countries that are not, let's say, in the same standard as EU countries, is not welcome in the EU territory in general. And the fact that we have with the new pact also a systematic trend to create state of exemptions from basic human rights, as it is actually the protection of, let's say, torture and mistreatment, which is actually the risk, the real risk that the vast majority of people coming through the source do face in case they are going back, even in the third country, which is Libya, even in their initial, let's say, state. For instance, the vast majority is coming from Sudan at the moment, but also from countries that are considered as so-called safe country of origin, as Egypt, which is actually a dictatorship. It is not, of course, cannot, let's say, just justify the denial of asylum in any case. So people who are coming, I think in the vast majority have the profile of persons in need of international protection. And in any case, they deserve the minimum, as at least in the European, let's say the so-called rule of law and structure, they are entitled for, the basic right for their claim, for their request to be examined and fairly decided.
Eleni, many thanks. I mean, do you agree with Eleni that this isn't an emergency situation, the position on Crete at the moment, that it is a micro-crisis, that it has evolved purely due to bad governance, bad management?
Yes, I agree. It's a framing on migration to present it as a new massive crisis, but the problem is the public policies on migration, and we can also note the hypocrisy of the European Union and European countries on the migration subjects. The European countries exploits all of the rest of the world and takes their best students, their best engineers, their best doctors, their most graduate and most skilled workers, and they bring them to their countries. But when it comes to people fleeing war or extreme poverty, they are being targeted and mistreated by those public policies against migration. This is the main hypocrisy that the European Union and Occidental countries have been doing for the last decades. And to add to that, they have a massive responsibility in those wars that the people are fleeing, in those authoritarian regimes that they have installed or supported throughout the years by their historical destructions and targeting of the countries of the Third World by a history of colonialism and neocolonialism. And this leads to migration. This leads to people trying to get a better life. And the European Union and the European countries are responsible for that.
Okay. Marianna, the Greek government says that it's sending the message that the passage to Greece is closing and that it's aiming to deter traffickers and their potential clients by ensuring that their investment in the journey may be completely wasted. Is that going to work? Will these measures being implemented by Greece deter anyone?
Of course not. You cannot stop migration. You cannot stop desperation. The way that Greece is dealing with it is extremely ill thought, and it's exactly the way that the European Union is dealing with it. People will not stop moving, and the European border works that way, and it should not be seen in isolation from its capitalist and post-colonial and colonial legacy. The European border will keep the ones it wants, which is the rich, and it will expel everyone else. People will not stop moving. They did not stop moving 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And the European Union is not targeting smugglers. Greece is not targeting smugglers. If they wanted to target smugglers, they would have operated elsewhere, not in the sea, because it has been proven that those who drive the boats are not the smugglers, they're migrants themselves. So I think what Greece is doing and what the European Union is doing is criminal. It is not going to work. And first and foremost, it's absolutely illegal. They're violating international law. And it's beyond me that this keeps happening over and over and over again. And we do not say anything about that.
Eleni, what should Greece be doing right now? You say it's a micro-crisis. Let's suppose for a moment it simply doesn't have the capacity to look after migrants and refugees in some of its territories, like Crete. Where should it be housing these people? How should it and the wider EU be treating migrants and asylum seekers who arrive on Greek shores?
First of all, I would like to remind us that there is, let's say, a precedent. There are actually two big precedents. The first is the precedent of 2015, where people coming from the Turkish shores at the time passed through Greece and actually moved to many European countries because their relatives, their links, their people were there to support them, and they did gain their access to the EU territory. And this happened for the first time with, the refugee as subject, let's say, of international law and of international, let's say, legal capacity. The second, I would like to remind us that we have the Ukrainian crisis, where almost 1 million of Ukrainian, were actually received and accepted by EU countries, which was good and positive, according to the solidarity clause, which is something that easily EU, considering its capacity and its possibilities and its legislation, could install even with people arriving from the south of Mediterranean, as mostly in Greece, Italy, Spain, and that could actually work without any serious, let's say, impact to the micromanagement of our societies. It is a political decision that this doesn't happen. And the fact that, the illegal practices of yesterday become the law of today, it's something that alarms us. Of course, we are, let's say, backsliding to far-right rhetorics with a not serious, let's say, result of management of the situation, but serious traumas in our societies, creating racism, xenophobia, and of course, the new instrumentalization of the refugee in order to cover other problems, socioeconomic, especially problems that EU at the moment and all EU countries faces.
Okay. I mean, to what extent does this whole issue of illegal migration, not just in Greece, but across the whole of Europe right now, need to be depoliticized, that it's simply not possible to find a solution to it until you can take the politics out of it?
In order to find a solution, we need to stop treating it as a problem. This is the narrative of the far right that won the cultural fight by describing migrants as a problem to handle. When migrants move to another country, they pay taxes, they work, and Europe is needing workers that can pay taxes and that can be of economical interest for them. And there is no documented reports that can say that migrants are a problem in Europe. It's the total opposite. Migrants are being exploited by those European countries. So we need to fight it politically, I think, by saying that it's not a migration issue, it's a race issue. European countries are not opposing migration; they are opposing Black migrants and Muslim migrants, and that are the people that are being targeted, because even Black people and Muslim people right now in those European countries who have the citizenships are being targeted by far-right policies and by the governments that are leaning towards this ideology. So we need to fight it politically by starting by the obvious answer. Migrants are not a problem. They are feeding the economical tissue in Europe, and they are being exploited by European countries.
Marianna, just to sound a cynical moment, a cynical opinion for just a moment. Hang on, let me just start that again. Marianna, just to sound a cynical note for a moment, to play devil's advocate here, to what extent are Libyan authorities milking this situation in order to extract as much money from the EU as possible before implementing a solution, while people smugglers continue to pump huge sums of money through the Libyan economy?
I mean, this is politics. The Libyan authorities are getting a lot of money from the European Union and they are stopping people. There's a lot of death in the Mediterranean happening. It may not be towards Crete, but there's a lot of death in the Mediterranean. And this is because of the actions of the Libyan authorities and of the actions of the European Union. They're getting a lot of money. They are trying to stop people. They are not successful at stopping people. Just like what happened with Turkey and the EU-Turkey statement.
But Marianna, what about all the people we hear? Marianna, what about all the people we hear who are stopped by the Libyan Coast Guard, who end up in essentially detention camps back in Libya?
They will try to cross again because the situation in Libya is torturous. And I don't think they should be stopped. Libya should, the European Union first and foremost should stop funding Libya's torture chambers. People will not stop. People are desperate for safety. They're desperate for life. They will not be stopped. Death does not stop them. The fear of death does not stop them. So what the European Union should do, they should finally find some humanity. They should start treating people with dignity and not choosing who belongs in and who does not belong.
Eleni, do you agree with that? I mean, what is the solution? Is there a solution here? How much longer are we going to have to see desperate people making desperate journeys, risking their lives for a better future?
Well, we have seen with, it's not so far away, the Peel of Cypriot. All of us, we were devastated, and also EU entities were really shocked about the fact that more than 600 people lost their lives in order to get, let's say, safety. So for me, I mean, let's say the response is not simple, but it's obvious. First of all, EU has to at least comply with the basic obligations, human obligations, legal obligation to receive and protect people arriving and asking for protection. This is something that it's out of any let's say, discussion or dispute or let's say bargain. Second, of course, because we have talked about the impact of the policies in the countries of origin, it is something that also EU should, let's say, evaluate and actually promote, because it is very important, the equality, let's say, in any sense. And just one last word, because
very quickly, Eleni, very quickly.
Okay, very quickly for Libya, because for Libya we know, Marianna just mentioned, that the situation there is really atrocious.
Okay.
And we have recent decisions. I mean, UK Supreme Court for less, let's say, for less events of torture and mistreatment related to Rwanda, exactly annulled the decision to transfer people there. We have the Italian courts that really defend not to transfer people to Albania. We have the Greek courts that also defend not to send people to Turkey. Imagine that we cannot discuss sending people back to Libya, and there is no way than rescue that people, armed, for instance, Navy and coast authorities that are in coast at the moment, their only obligation for which they are really, they will be, let's say, accountable is to rescue people in these conditions.
All right. There, I'm afraid we must end it. We're out of time. Eleni Spathana, Amine Snoussi, and Marianna Karakoulaki, many thanks indeed for being with us today. And thank you for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website. That's at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle there is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.